You know, we usually think the story is over when a battle ends. But what if I told you that after one particular historic siege, the most important moments were actually just getting started? We're about to dive into an incredible story of treachery and mercy, of arrogance and humility, and it reveals some really deep lessons about justice and divine wisdom. So, the Battle of the Trench, it was a massive victory for the early Muslim community, for sure. But the real tests, the moments that would really echo through history, they all took place once the swords were put away. So let's explore what happened next. Okay, first up, we're tackling a heavy subject, the consequences of betrayal. We're going to look at the fate of Huyai ibn Akhtab and Ka'b ibn Asad, who were the leaders of Banu Quraizah, and the principle of justice their story really brings to light. To really get what's about to happen, we have to start with this verse from the Quran. It's key because it immediately frames these events not as some simple political revenge, but as a direct act of divine justice against those who break their promises. So picture this. The Muslims are under siege, surrounded by a huge army. And their allies, the tribe of Banu Quraizah, they had a mutual defense treaty, but they broke it. They plotted a devastating attack from inside the city, aiming right for the most defenseless people. This one single act of treachery, well, it sets the stage for everything that follows. And here is the first really powerful lesson. Their whole intricate plan to betray their allies just completely backfired. It didn't end up harming the Muslims at all. But in the end, it sealed their own fate. The sources really stress a crucial idea here. Evil plotting ultimately consumes the person who's doing the plot. But this goes way beyond just the political consequences. There is a deeply personal story here. We're going to use the final moments of one of the leaders, Huyai ibn Akhtab, as a kind of case study in the spiritual sickness of arrogance. So as Huyai was brought forward for his execution, you might expect some remorse, maybe a moment of reflection. But there was nothing, no sign of it. His final words were actually recorded, and they give us this chilling look into a heart that was defiant right to the very end. These were his last words. And notice, there are two really distinct parts here. First, he's proud, totally unbending about his hatred. But then, there's this stunning moment of clarity where he admits he knows the rule. When you abandon God, you yourself are abandoned. He understood the consequence, but his pride just sealed his heart. He couldn't change course. And what's so fascinating is that Scripture gives us this timeless diagnosis for this exact spiritual condition. The Quran describes a person who takes their own desires and makes them into a god. I mean, Huyai's story is a textbook example of this verse. He was a man so eaten up by pride and hatred that he was just left to follow that path to its grim, inevitable conclusion. Okay, let's make a pretty big shift now. We're moving from all that darkness of pride and judgment to this incredible moment of intellectual light and humility that happened among the Prophet's companions on their way to Banu Quraizah. So, as the Muslim army was marching, the Prophet gave this command. The time for the afternoon prayer Asr was getting close. But what did he mean by that? Was it a literal order to delay the prayer? Or was it more like a figure of speech to say, hey, step on it? The companions had to figure it out right there on the spot. And this is where we see two totally sincere interpretations emerge. One group took the command literally. They just kept riding, and they prayed Asr only after they arrived, which was well after sunset. The other group, though, they reasoned that the Prophet's intent was to stress urgency, not to make them miss the prayer. So they prayed on time while they were still on the road. Two different actions, both coming from a sincere desire to obey. And this is the absolute crucial point. When the Prophet was told about their disagreement, he validated both groups. He didn't correct either one. This moment established a huge foundational principle in Islamic law, that a sincere, good faith effort to find the right path is itself rewarded, even if it leads to different conclusions. It's just a profound lesson in intellectual humility. So now we pivot again, moving from a story of judgment to one of profound mercy. Right in the middle of all these heavy events, a personal debt of honor from long before the conflict suddenly comes into play, and it creates this powerful counter-narrative. The story is all about these two men. Years earlier, in some tribal war before Islam even arrived, Azubair had saved Thabit's life. Now, with Azubair facing execution, Thabit remembers that old favor. He feels like he owes him. So he goes to the Prophet to intercede on his behalf. And this whole thing unfolds in three incredible stages. First, Thabit asks for his friend's life, and the Prophet agrees. But then Az-Zubair hears his family and tribe are gone, and he basically says there's no point in living. So Thabit goes back to the Prophet and asks for his family. That's granted too. Then Az-Zubair complains he's got no wealth left. Thabit goes back a third time, and the Prophet grants the return of his property. It's just a beautiful example of persistent loyalty being met with more and more mercy. Finally, let's look at the resolution of this whole thing, the inheritance of the land and property, and how this wasn't just a material victory, but really the fulfillment of a divine promise. I mean, the spoils of victory were immense. We're talking thousands of weapons, armor, livestock, and most importantly, these valuable fortresses and farmlands. This brought up a new question. What was the ultimate purpose of all this wealth? And this is where the story really finds its ultimate purpose. The Prophet distributed the houses and lands specifically to the Muhajirun, those early Muslims who had been forced to flee persecution in Mecca, leaving absolutely everything behind. For years, they'd basically been refugees. This act gave them homes, it gave them stability, and it finally established them as secure members of the community. And so we end right where we began, with a verse from the Quran that was revealed specifically about this event. It just ties the whole narrative together. The final outcome, from justice for treachery to mercy for an old friend, is framed as a divine act, fulfilling a promise and setting the community on solid ground. It's such a powerful reminder of how even the harshest moments of conflict can give us lessons that shape a faith for generations.